This is a very loaded subject, a very ginger topic. I'll be careful with it. In the late 80s, early 90s, I guess we could say 88 to 94 ballpark, maybe 88 to 96, there was a huge debate in the United States, especially also in England, that erupted in cognitive psychology during those years concerning issues of forgetting, retrieving, and creating autobiographical memories. And the issue concerns whether victims of abuse can or do repress memories of incidents of abuse and then retrieve them later. It's something called a recovered memory. And whether some therapists, maybe a minority, misinformed about the workings of memory prompted their clients to have false memories of things that didn't happen. And this was a red hot debate, I don't know, 89 to 96, I'm guessing the years, but it appeared to reach its apex really in about 94. Where two things may be true at once, that people are really abused in their youth and remember it later in various settings, including therapy. And another reality was that some therapists were coaching their clients in such a way to induce memories that may not have been true and that were not truly repressed. So, of course, in a justified or a just society, we don't reflexively assume that an allegation of abuse is false, but around this period there frankly were many allegations that proved to be false and a result of therapeutic inducing. So if you'll indulge me there, if you want to read this, I don't want to bore you too much with it. It's in the text, but there was an incredible case in 1990 about George Franklin Sr. In fact, there's a recently made documentary from 2021 on Amazon Prime about this. It's very interesting, about an evinced memory of a murder. So Eileen Franklin accused her 51-year-old father of murdering her childhood friend when they were both children. And the nature of the memory proved to be entirely fabricated. George Franklin did not do this. So how could such a thing happen? Well, the very bottom paragraph, Eileen's memory report was believed by her therapist and by several members of her family and by the police, which chose to prosecute George Franklin. And it's also believed by the jury who convicted him. He was released later, not long later, 2 or 3 years. The jury began its deliberations in November 90 and returned a verdict the very next day. And as it turns out, these memories were entirely manufactured, although Eileen did not believe she was lying. She genuinely believed she was telling the truth. Now, most of the abuse that they're referring to in this part of the chapter has to do with childhood sexual abuse, so it's a rather grim topic. This is the rare case that had to do with a murder. So Loftus was an early doubter. This is the same Elizabeth Loftus, and you can tell by the time period it falls between late 80s and early 90s. Examined various questions, among them how authentic recovered memories are. The idea that memories of traumatic events can be repressed, buried in the unconscious for a long time, was something that Sigmund Freud might have believed. And there is some adaptation to be said for repressing painful things. But from a cognitive perspective, the question is whether such repressed memories can be carefully described and then documented and explained. So Loftus and some others, Lindsay and Reed, pointed to it. Now, this is where it gets a little controversial. Pointed to advice given in a different self-help books, one of the best known at that time being Courage to Heal by Bass and Davis. That book encourages readers who are wondering whether they've ever been victims of abuse to look for the presence of various symptoms like low self-esteem, depression, self-destructive habits, etc., which could apply to a lot of people and wouldn't necessarily be indicative of abuse. So the problem the authors noted is that these symptoms can occur for people who have not been victims of abuse, and the symptoms are not just specific enough to be diagnosed. So the authors, Bass and Davis, made a very strong claim, and here it is. If you're unable to remember any specific instances of abuse like the ones mentioned above, but still have that feeling that something happened to you, it probably did. I mean, that's pretty shocking assertion. And if you think you were abused and your life shows symptoms, then you were. Very definitive. So other authors, other researchers began to be eager to demonstrate that memories could be derived of whole cloth. And here's the spirit of the Loftus and Pickrell article from 1995, The Lost in the Mall Experiment, which was kind of goofy and had to be a challenge to get past IRB. But her point was, Loftus's point, her central point, was to demonstrate that people would believe something that was somewhat outlandish that definitely didn't happen. So forgive all the stretched text here, but in the study, 24 people were participants. They interviewed the relatives of each participant. And from those interviews generated 3 events that happened in the college student's life and at a young age, 4 to 6. And they shouldn't have been traumatic, but just everyday events. From the interviews with relatives, experimenters then created false accounts of an event that didn't happen, in which the target was allegedly lost in a Seattle area shopping mall at age 5. Included in the accounts were details about the name of the mall that had been the closest one to the participant. Most of these were Washington state natives, as well as the names of family members who plausibly might have accompanied them. And here's an example. Your mom, Tien and Tuan all went to the Bremerton Kmart somewhere in Washington. You must have been 5 years old at the time. Your mom gave each of you some money to get a blueberry icy. You ran ahead to get into the line first and somehow got lost. Tien found you crying to an elderly Chinese woman, and there are a lot of Chinese people that live in that region. They don't mention that gratuitously. And you 3 went together to get an icy. And among the things that they found, Loftus and Pickrell's participants recalled 68% of the true events, but 29% of those 24, and I don't know how many that is off the top of my head, I guess 5, recalled the false event about being lost in the mall. But the quality of recall in their words and the volume, etc., was higher for the true events than it was for the lost in the mall event. But just these 5 out of 24 offered an existence proof of these whole cloth false memories. So that was their goal. And by her description, Loftus sort of slammed the door on the idea that whole cloth memories just could not be engendered, as some therapists believe. We can't just make things up and people will believe them. Well, Loftus thought that they could. And she, to some degree, proved it could be done here with at least these 5 out of 24 people. So there's been some other research suggesting the same thing. 25% of participants recalled falsely hospitalizations, spilling punch on a bride at a wedding. Oh, jeez. Being doused with the fire sprinklers inside of a building. So you got caught in a building, they caught on fire, and you got doused with water. And if you could show photographs along with it, it enhances the idea. So Gary and Wade convinced people that they were involved in some incident with a teacher that involved slime. There was a product called slime. It was green and it came in a can. But if you showed the pictures of the students and the teacher, you were more likely to believe it just based on the photographic recall of what your classmates looked like. Now, I should say that not all cognitive psychologists like Loftus have reviewed the research and received it and on false memories with complete enthusiasm. Kathy Pesdick, who's still alive, who's only about 80, argued that just because an explanation exists for how false memories could be formed doesn't mean it always happens. Pesdick noted that an aeronautical engineering explanation exists for why it's impossible for bumblebees to fly, even though they obviously do, right? So she cautioned against assuming that memory recovery therapy is widespread and argued that existing evidence for therapist implanted memories is weak. Now, I happen to disagree with her. I think it could very well happen in a therapy session, but she had the contrary opinion. You know, everybody has their own thoughts on these things. Now, after this clip is a 2-part 60-minute special that lasts about a total of 13 minutes. And I want to be careful about this. It's about Roseanne Barr, who was at the peak of her fame in 94 with the TV show. And she had been a very successful comedian, but she did something unusual in 1993 and accused her parents, who were still alive then, of abusing her. And the entire Barr family rallied behind the parents and against Roseanne. And as you can tell in the 60-minute special, they're dubious of her claims. And among the things that they mention are that she was she claims to have memories from infancy, which is implausible. And truth be told, they gave her a very sarcastic negative treatment toward Roseanne, which I think may have been imbalanced. I think you'll agree when you watch it. But they also branch into the general idea of repressed memories. And 60 Minutes, during this nearly 30-year-old broadcast from April of 94, takes a very dim view of it. And you'll see an image of the book Courage to Heal and how it's treated. So I want to be careful and not take a side, although I think I just did a minute ago. But I think two things can be true at once. One is that allegations of abuse should be believed reflexively. On the other hand, especially during this time period, it could also be true that these memories were somewhat manufactured by the therapist, as these book authors would have you believe. So on pages 21 and 22 there, that sort of sentiment was widespread back in the 90s. So the 60 Minute special is interesting. It's not the best video quality, and you'll see Roseanne not treated very well by 60 Minutes. They're very dubious of her. But nevertheless, it's a very, very timely and very encompassing view of what was happening at that time.